Hi everybody, it's Joey Remenyi here from seekingbalance.com.au. I'm a vestibular audiologist and neuroplasticity therapist, and I take great pleasure in sharing the journey of healing for my clients who are suffering with chronic dizziness, chronic vertigo, chronic tinnitus. And my role is to really help people feel at ease in their body, to come home to their body, and to help unfurl the confusing aspects of how did I get into this pickle? Why am I here? Why did I wake up one day and I don't know myself anymore? So healing is really, it's a great story. And the main character in the story is me, myself, I. It's the person going through it. And today we're actually taking the story off on the journey of birth, of creating a baby, of going through labor, and looking at the analogies of what it means to rebirth ourselves and to go through the labor of rebirthing the new version of me. And I have a beautiful expert and Australian colleague of mine on the call today. Her name is Rhea Dempsey, and I'm absolutely delighted to introduce you to Rhea today. So firstly, welcome, Rhea, and thank you for your time.
Beautiful to be here.
So Rhea Dempsey is a highly sought after childbirth educator. She is a doula and birth attendant, and we'll speak a little bit more about that as we get into the conversation. Rhea is a counsellor, speaker, and author. I highly recommend her books. And on a personal note, I have no question that I read your first book 5 or 6 years ago. And I would say it highly impacted the choices I made in approaching the birth of my first child. So thank you so much. And thank you for being here to flesh out this conversation.
I'm so looking forward to seeing, the richness that we can bring together from these sort of different modalities, but seeing those shared sort of values and shared understandings about how the human condition unfolds. Yeah.
So for anyone who's familiar with the way I work, I help people look at the holistic picture and integrate all the various parts of themselves into their healing journey. We're much more than our ears. We're much more than our brain or our psychology or our legs or our arms, or in birthing, our cervix. It's the whole person. And this applies also for fathers and for men. A man has a child and becomes a father. So the story is relevant to all of us. And the role of the doula is to be with and to support that process, which is really what I see myself doing with my vertigo and tinnitus clients. So I was giggling with Rhea earlier that really Rhea's the birth version of me. We have so much in common professionally. But would you like to explain to the listeners just simply what a doula is in your perspective?
Yes, so a doula, not medically trained, so we have midwives, and the philosophy of midwifery is to be with the woman. But in more contemporary times, the midwives' role in lots of Western sort of more medicalized cultures has shifted a little bit more to being, to being a bit more, with the machinery or with the protocols of the hospital or what have you. Not all midwives, of course, but that's the tendency. So that idea of being with the mother is more, as you say, in that human realm, in the realm of the heart, in the realm of the feelings, also in the realm of some guidance about how to trust their bodies and how to work with their bodies. So I think that doulas have taken up a space in many of the sort of westernized medical cultures around birth that perhaps once, a long time ago, might have been taken up by the midwife or your mother or your sister. So we're in that role of being with. So we're not with the regulations and routines of the hospitals. We're not with the machinery. We're not with the drugs. We're with that presence with the woman, and with some experience behind us to make some guidance in some of those sticky points where the emotions are running high, or where women are feeling so challenged that they feel like they don't know how to do it, and so on. So it's such a privileged position to be working in, to be a doula, to, the eye contact, the touch, the helping her to steady her breath or what have you, all of these things, of course. And I guess maybe if we were to drill it down into the physiology, we're sort of hopefully oxytocin magicians or something like that. We can hopefully bring bring our own love and care and centeredness into that space, and then through that connection that we've made with the woman and the family, the partner, we're working on the love side of the story, and that of course helps that oxytocin to come through, which of course, as I call it, Queen Oxytocin really is running that birth show is really run by Queen Oxytocin when it's going at its best. So we can do a little bit of magic around that.
So to put this into context, so my community is quite familiar with the neuroplasticity and that there are neurotransmitters and hormones involved as our brain and our body and our biology and brain chemistry changes. Oxytocin is a word I really could use more of. It's both a neurotransmitter and a hormone. And oxytocin is, as Rhea said, it comes back to love. You know, when we're in fear, people have heard of cortisol and adrenaline, and fear puts our brain and our brain chemistry into a different place. And that's where healing for my vertigo and tinnitus clients is really paused. It's delayed. When we're in stress, fight, flight, freeze, the body can't problem solve and create new neural networks. Same with birth. When we're in fear, the fight, flight, freeze, the cervix and the birthing process pauses, because the body's assuming it's not safe to bring a baby into the world if I'm freaking out. Maybe there's a lion around the corner. I don't want my baby to get eaten by a lion. So that old evolutionary decision is, let's pause the labor. So what Rhea's talking about is when we have somebody and their exclusive role is not to check the baby's heartbeat or to check the cervix dilation or all of those medical things, it's their sole role is to make sure there's safety and there's an atmosphere of trust, relaxation, love, opening up, and that vulnerability is okay. In order to really, truly surrender to rebirth ourselves or to birth a baby, we have to be able to drop into that place of, it's almost a deep meditation. We go somewhere, the body completely opens, and then of course magic can happen. Yes. So this is just putting into context some of that new language. So oxytocin is really the love drug. It's chemistry in the brain, and it's when it's made by our body for ourselves. And as my clients are going through their self-compassion processes and bringing love and kindness back in and directing that towards themselves, they're actually giving their brain an opportunity to release more of this oxytocin, which has a magical cascade of impact further down their biological processes. And this is what's going on through the laboring woman's process. And the more the closer the baby gets to being born, the more that oxytocin is really, hopefully, blossoming and moving through her brain chemistry.
Can I just say one or two things to just expand from the birth side of things, some of the things that you've just said then? One, and some of this I think would relate to the situation with the people who are following your work, and maybe some of them not quite so, you'll be able to tease that out. But certainly, because in contemporary times, in most westernized cultures, birth has been placed into a very strong medical frame. Yeah. And that the sort of the social and cultural message seems to be exclusively about medical safety. If we're in the hospital, if we've got the machinery, if we can do this, we can do this, we can do that, all of that stuff that medicine can do supposedly to save babies or to keep mums okay. So is this idea of medical safety. But when we take the point of view of the hormones, it's not, the medical safety can be just papering over or putting a framework around a woman who is very fearful. And in fact, that medicalized culture tends to make us much more fearful about birth. So the mother can be fearful, and as you say, the hormonal balance then in her body is not really conducive to birthing, but she's going to what the culture says is the place to be safe, which is the hospitals and within that medical frame. But that doesn't offer this deep sort of inner human connection, feeling of safety and love, which is going to be the support for the development of the hormone. So it's quite a conundrum, really. And I'm wondering, in terms of the people who follow you and your work, that maybe there's some of that too, because presumably anything that seems to go wrong in the body is seen, because we're in such a strong medical frame, is seen to be a medical thing that we could fix. But if we can't fix it, well, then there's still all that distress and fear, and the hormones, as you're saying, need to be addressed so that we can do some of that healing from within. Well, so I think it's a beautiful analogy there between the two.
Definitely. And I So I recently gave birth almost 6 months ago, and it's on your mind. You're like, well, I may have a rare condition. Like maybe there is going to be something not quite right about my birth. So it's on the back of the mind as a birthing person. I need to be realistic. Things go wrong, right? Even if it is rare. And I think it's the same with vertigo and tinnitus. We need medical clearance. We need to dot our I's and cross our T's, talk to the doctors and say, look, is there anything that requires medical intervention? And if so, I want to know about it. Once we get the medical clearance, and I was so fortunate, I had a private midwife who I saw every month, if not every 2 weeks. I was constantly monitored, and the message was always, you're perfectly normal. Your baby's perfectly normal. Let's proceed as normal. So I never had to go to a hospital because I was never a medical patient. Yeah. So I could birth in a private home birth environment where I was not disturbed, and all of my beautiful natural physiology could unfold. And just like the textbooks say, I didn't feel any pain. I didn't feel any distress. My body just birthed the baby. It was really a miracle.
Yes.
And I saw my job as being present and not getting in the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was, I was very fortunate to have that situation. And I think the medical conversation and safety is very real, and getting medical clearance is something I recommend everybody do. And once you've got that medical clearance, go dive deep into trusting the body, dive deep into trusting the physiology, dive deep, don't second guess, don't triple guess, try not to get 15 opinions.
Yes.
Because I think that's when we get stuck, and that's when, doesn't matter what we're birthing, whether it's a baby or rebirthing a new version of ourselves, we can get stuck and nothing's happening. Like, why isn't this goddamn baby coming out? Why is there so much pain? And that's where I would love you to speak, Rhea, on these blockages, the fear story, the attachment theory. What's going on? What are we holding in us that can be blocking our capacity to fully surrender and open up to that natural physiology to go?
Yeah. Well, normally if I'm talking about this, I'll have to do some diagrams at the same time, so I'll just have to try and paint a picture. But of course, there's the social and cultural, the contemporary social and cultural situation that all birthing women now, particularly in Western cultures, are in the middle of. And so they're bombarded with all those messages of, fear about birth, and that it doesn't work so well and it has to be watched over, and all of that stuff. So then, in the context of that, hopefully, like you, more women can be what I call savvy enough to make choices that are going to give them a sort of protective circle around them that helps to buffer those cultural messages that build the fear. But many of those sort of opportunities are not so widely available, or socially and culturally they're not sort of embedded as a possible choice for so many women. So a lot of women have the cultural fear message living in them, as well as then going into places where that's being played out, i.e. a lot of the hospitals. So first of all, there's all of that. And I guess there's that thing really, Joey, of understanding that the individual woman, there's her own story, which I'll come to, who she is, and as she meets this sort of maternal culture, the maternity culture. But really, when we think of so many women getting trapped in that or caught and not coming through with the sort of birth that they were hoping for, sometimes the women blame themselves, or other people might somehow or other look at them in some sort of judgment. But of course, really, birthing women are being so failed by these cultural messages and by the systems to not be supported in the ways that could unfold births in a more positive way. So there's that.
Can I just add to that too? I feel so gifted, and this is serendipity for sure. So I read your book because a girlfriend asked me to support her through her birth. So I wasn't thinking about birthing myself. It had nothing to do with me. I was educating myself on the system and choices while I was not emotionally involved. And I think that was a real gift, because I think timing's an issue too, because if people are trying to suddenly do all this research and learn while they're pregnant, it's harder. Whereas I think if we can slowly learn and have which is why I hope this conversation gets spread to daughters, to nieces, that the earlier we learn about the choices we have, the earlier we can get comfortable with that power, and we can actually advocate for ourselves. Because, my husband was not cool about a home birth. We had to have those conversations to make sure it suited everybody.
Yes, of course, all of that. So to go back then, so that's painting the picture of the wider cultural space and the birth space itself. Then, of course, we have who is this mother, and how does she meet all of that? So that would bring into, who is this mother in terms of how she understands her body and works with her body and trusts her body and knows her body or not. And what are the things in her life that shape that one way or another? And of course, you've asked me to talk a little bit more about the deeper psychological stuff. So then we go in deeper as well in terms of who is this woman, what is her life story, and what is her way of being in the world, particularly that comes out of her earliest life story.
Yeah.
And I guess with your followers that you probably talk about the memory system that's laid down in the body in those first early years. They talk about, the first 3 years, which includes also some of the time in the womb and then the birth, and then those early years when we're having lots and lots of experiences with hopefully loving caregivers and mums and dads, and that whole beautiful, delicious thing about the baby and the quality of care and holding that the baby receives. And that idea of holding, not just the physical holding, but, in psychological terms, that how the baby is held in the heart and the loving connection with the caregivers lays down lots of things, but mostly we don't remember them consciously. They're not part of our conscious memory systems, but nonetheless they shape how we view the world, how we view ourselves, how we view safety in relationships, how we view ourselves in relation to being valued and cared for and nurtured, so being worthy. So it lays down those messages about how I feel about myself deeply, about whether I feel like I'm lovable, I'm valuable, I'm secure in that people will respond to me when I'm in need. And all of this, of course, is at play with lots of how we grow through the rest of our lives. And I guess my frame and my lens through that is to be thinking about attachment theory. And so, and of course, without going into too much detail about that, but that secure attachment is where we feel, yes, that we're loved, we're strong and capable ourselves, we're given lots of messages to explore the world, but also we're given lots of messages that if we feel vulnerable or we feel under threat, with no shame, we can tune to others and turn to them and be nurtured and cared for until we feel strong enough then to go out and take on whatever that challenge is, whether that's about learning how to ride a bike, or it's about finishing our year 12, or it's about giving birth to a baby, or whether it's about facing a health crisis or some sort of other crisis in our lives. So are we attuned through that very early foundation which is laid down to feel like I have my own resources and capacity, but sometimes life is tougher than I feel like I can cope with. And so then at those times, without feeling shameful or without a worry that we're burdening other people or what have you, we can lean into other people's nurture and care and expertise to guide us. And we can do that in a very, a way that doesn't diminish anything of our own power, but also supports our growth and our power and our potency into the world. So, but if we don't have that secure attachment, if we have one or other of the insecure attachments, then in that case, we learn something different. We're learning something about, well, am I okay? Am I lovable? Am I valuable? Do people attune to me? Am I going to be abandoned? When I'm in a threat situation or a very difficult situation for myself, will people come on board to give me support? Is it shameful even to ask, because I've had to sort of protect myself by being super, super powerful in my own life. And if I now feel like I'm crumbling, then that's very difficult for myself to even acknowledge, let alone the shame of having to, show that vulnerability to another person in order to ask for help. Or, of course, we don't trust that the help will ever be there anyway. So that whole thing about abandonment, about shame, about worthiness. So attachment theory talks about, whenever we're in a threat situation, this is particularly when our attachment system is triggered. And so then whether there are people around that we can easily ask for that support from and accept it, or this is much more challenging to our deep sense of how we've how we've shaped ourselves through our ways of being in the world to cope with life. Yeah. So in my work about birth, I say, birth is a threat situation. I'm sure birth has always been a threat situation through generations. That whole thing about, finding safe space, making sure that the lion's not around, choosing a place where we feel like we can be safe when, as women, we're birthing and we're somewhat vulnerable, and that this small baby certainly is vulnerable. We need to be attuned to safety. So it's a threat situation which guides us, has always guided us, to seek safe place for birthing. Mm-hmm. It's just that at the moment in our birth culture, the contemporary culture, is like the message from the culture is, well, the safe place is in the hospital, and that's attuned to that medical safety, rather than this deeper security about how I'm feeling in this situation, and am I feeling safe, so therefore the oxytocin will run. So if women are troubled by earlier life experiences of not being well held, not being well attuned to, and have those insecure attachments, then their physiology is shaky. They might be in the hospital, but their physiology is shaky because that fear of abandonment, or the fear of exposing vulnerability and shame. So there are a lot of control mechanisms that people with these histories develop in life to try and keep everything under control in this way, rather than exposing these deeper core issues. But they can flare up in the labour, which means that the hormones are not in keeping with how that labour should ideally unfold. Please, I can see you excited to jump into something.
Well, I just wanted to put it into the language that my audience will resonate with, which is through our early years, including in utero, certainly as we're in our first 7 years of life, we're really setting down the neural networks, patterns and pathways that our brain will hardwire. And these are the certain networks, reactions and responses that we will be doing daily. And so these feelings of not feeling worthy, not feeling good enough, they're not conscious, they're actually quite subconscious. And they get re-triggered even when we're bullied in the playground, or we make a mistake trying to flip a pancake. There's endless amounts of repetition in the system of, that mum forgot about me again, or, dad ignored me again. And these little messages are constantly getting triggered in the brain, and they put us into either deep relaxation, oxytocin, loving, goodness, openness. And that's where vulnerability sits. Vulnerability is a great strength. When we can be vulnerable, drop into that and say, oh, wow, I need to hold myself in this place, or I think I need somebody else to help hold me in this space. We can keep the oxytocin, the love and the softness alive neurologically, right? And what Rhea is talking about is when we get triggered with our worth, abandonment, rejection, or self-critiquing, which often starts in our early, that inner child work, facing our inner voices. When that gets re-triggered neurologically in the physiology, at the brain chemistry level, we actually go into the fight, flight, freeze. We shut down, we contract. It's the opposite of what you want when you're embarking on any learning or change or birthing experience. We contract and close down, and the body is saying, not yet, I'm not ready, not yet, I'm not ready. And it doesn't matter if you're trying to heal a chronic symptom and rebirth yourself into something new, or whether you're trying to birth a baby. The body needs to soften and open and say, I can try something new. I'm going to open up and explore. I'm going to do something different. We need to be in that oxytocin place. Now, on a second thing, I just wanted to say there's nothing wrong with birthing in hospital, and that's not where we're coming from. In fact, I did a lot of research in my preparation, and I met one incredible midwife who birthed 30 years ago, I think, or at least 20 years ago in the UK. And because she was a midwife, she felt very safe in the hospital, that she was a single mum. That's where her friends were. That's where her colleagues were. And she told me she had a 53-minute orgasmic birth in the hospital. So look, it can happen, it can work, and people can be held, and there can be humanism. It's not about the hospital. It's more about the protocols, the systems. Do you have bright lights on? Do you have funny noises beeping? Do you have random staff members or students coming in and looking at your vagina when you don't want that to happen? These are all the things that can happen that can be out of our control if we're in a hospital setting. And what's their risk mitigation? Are they going to induce you before you're ready? Are you going to be asked lots of questions and have to advocate for yourself all the time? A lot of those things don't happen if you choose to birth potentially at home or in a home birth center where there's not the equipment, there's not, it's a different culture. So it's not that one's right or wrong. It's more, for me personally, I knew I would be triggered by a hospital setting. I don't like hospitals. I'm uncomfortable. I don't like the lighting. I don't like the sounds. My personal body would react in a closure way. So for me, it made sense to enter the hospital as a patient who is grateful for medical intervention that I need, not to go in as a healthy woman who doesn't need it.
Yes, exactly.
So this is the conversation I want you to think about as a listener, is if you've already given birth and it didn't quite go the way you wanted, looking at, okay, well, perhaps what happened, what choices didn't I know about? And if I'm going through another rebirthing again, how could I potentially make new choices? How could I take my power back? How could I attend to that little insecure part of me that needs someone to witness the vulnerability, that needs to be able to move through and open up? So this is about opening up. Well, what to next? What does this mean for me now? How can I deepen my healing? So I'll throw it back over to you, Rhea, in terms of, let's say someone goes through a birth that doesn't go so well for them. Maybe they're induced, maybe it ends up with the epidural cascades and forceps and all sorts of things. And they're like, oh goodness, that was not what I thought it would happen. What might healing look like for them as they actually move through the trauma of going, wow, what happened? You know, do you want to speak a little bit about that, which I think is really what your book is fabulous for, not just birthing women, but also women trying to make sense of what happened if it didn't quite go to plan.
So I first of all, of course, I think that I would hope that they get the message, but they've probably got to look outside of that frame, you know, the medical frame, but they would get the message that it's not, maybe just let me step back from that a little bit and say that mostly in the and I totally take your point. Some hospital situations are brilliant, and but women have got to wind their way through to find something that is going to feel safe to them within that network. But sadly, one of the things that happens in births that don't go straightforwardly in the hospital often is because of the culture of the hospital rather than the woman's body or the woman's capacity. But often the way it's explained and presented to the woman is to sort of embed a feeling that it's her, that her body doesn't work,
like a failure to progress, instead of actually we're not offering you enough oxytocin.
Or we're messing around with your oxytocin and we're boosting your adrenaline, and so no wonder you know. So so I think there's education involved as a first point to start to unpack that, to understand, well, why, what happened? And that for a lot of women can be their you know, that can be the start of a healing journey once they start to look at that and understand what birth needs, what is on offer, where you met that, and then it's not surprising that then often these births don't go well. The statistics are through the roof in terms of very interfered with births. So fitting that together and educating yourself and having those aha moments about, right, okay, I understand. Then that doesn't take care of all of the distress or the healing that might be needed in the body, but it's really a start to that new way of thinking that has them start to claim their own power in that, or their own thwarted power, if you like, their own the sort of way the culture has shaped that they should give away their power in birth. And so they start to think, well, I could, you know, there are other options. So that's one thing. And for some women, that can really just be the core of it. And so then if they're going on to have another baby, you know, they start to be very, I know that for me, when I had my first baby, that was the case. And I came out of that birth after just a little bit of education from one or two friends who said some things to me, and then all of a sudden it just really radicalized me in terms of thinking, oh my God, there's a whole other way about doing this. So that for some women that can be it. For other women, of course, if the trauma then of what's happened about the birth, or the feeling of failure that they have, or the lack of connection with their body or their baby that is a result of that cascade of interventions, that can of course tap into other older life stories or ways of thinking about themselves, or life experiences that have left them with some of those same feelings. So for some women, that a distressing birth can sort of take the band-aid off, or the bandage, or the deep scarring off older stories that now are emerging and calling for a deeper healing. And ideally, if that happens, women are then, serendipity, or some sort of shaping of people coming into their awareness that they can tap into, who can help them on that journey, or they go seeking those people who can help them do that deeper work, whether that's again deeper psychological work, or sometimes sort of deeper healing work in the body to bring those old stories into the light and bring some healing. And certainly I know a large part of my work, I don't go to quite so many births anymore. In particular, mainly the births in my own family. I've had that privilege of being with all the babies in the next generation of my family now, so I'll always be waking up in the middle of the night to go see them, but not so many others. But sadly, I do a lot of birth debriefing, which is this thing of, and a birth debriefing session for me is partly education, as I've said, about what that's all about, and then it's about looking at the sort of timeline and the things that happen, but then it's also about looking at, well, where does, along that timeline, when this started to unfold in this particular way, or you started to feel this vulnerability or what have you, what else is going on in your feelings, and what else might that link to? So there might be some deeper psychological exploration. And for some women, then there's massage and deeper sort of body healing work that can really release some of that stress and strain and fear that can be trapped in the body. Because if I can just make one other point about that, because something about, we can get the babies born.
Yeah.
Medically, we can get the babies born. Some, with women who come for birth debriefing, sometimes what we have, or particularly women, the very high rates of postnatal depression and very high rates of a lot of distress afterwards, that sometimes what might happen in a birth, for instance, is that the mother, in terms of her body experience and being in a situation where nobody is really with her, not that being with to help to support her and guide her through some tough emotional moments in the birth. So maybe we have a woman who is triggered back to some trauma in her early life because of some of the sensations she's feeling in the birth, or because she's feeling that abandonment again, or what have you. And in birthing, there's what I call, first of all, the evolutionary regression, which is that shift in brain waves, the shift in the hormones, what they're doing, and that shift down into that primal woman who is instinctive and in tune with her body. But for some women on part of that journey, they can go on an age regression, like a psychological age regression. And so maybe at that point, that tough part in the labor, we have actually a woman who's regressed back to, 7 years old when that thing happened, or when her mother died, or when some great trauma. And so maybe her body shuts down because it's not safe. She's a 7-year-old girl trying to think that she's going to be able to be a mother and release this baby from her body, and that's not working. Well, we can do the Caesar. We can do the epidural or the synthetic hormone. We can get the baby born and place this baby into the arms of that 7-year-old girl. And then, these are part of then the aspects that lead to postnatal depression, and that mother then hopefully will be in a right place to do that work and catch up with herself again, and those older wounds are looked at from a fresh perspective with some other care. But in labour, of course, I guess it's another part of the doula work, that often we're working much more in that psychological realm. And so if we're seeing we're getting to know the mother before the labour anyway, so we get to know who she is, and we're asking, I call these wild cards, some of these life stories. And we talk about all of these beforehand, and for myself or other experienced midwives who work in this way as well, we would know, well, maybe that story, the way we see that story working out in labours, is that the cervix is just not budging, even with good, strong contractions. Or at that stage in a labour, when that sort of story of abandonment comes, women often go into this age regression, and they just need to have a cathartic release, or they need to be held and rocked and cuddled and lots of tears come out or whatever. So we're dealing with that, all of these things to help to release and bring the mother back into her body and release that fear, as you say, fight, flight, freeze, to bring her present. So there's a lot of ways that can be healed during the labor, but then also after the labor, some of that can be done in terms of somatic healing for some women through the body. Some it's education, some it's psychological work, some it's just their own awakening, which helps them to shift out of that feeling of that, no, it's not my body has failed my body, but really what's happening in this culture is not really useful to the way I need to be birthing. So there's some of the things. And after, well, particularly, you showed that book. I think that the last story in that book is just such a beautiful story of a woman whose birth really awakened my awareness about some issues about birth that I wrote about in the first book. She's through the first book and in the second birth, and she talks about, I should know the quote exactly, but she talks about that when she was in the tub, going through these really tough contractions, and really she'd regressed quite a ways, an age regression. But she talks about feeling that she was supported by me plus 2 midwives at a birth centre, midwives who she knew and had a relationship with, and that she felt like, it was the first time ever in her life, with her body and herself being in some vulnerability, that she ever felt loved and cared and supported. Mm-hmm. And because that labour went on for a few hours, she had that experience for quite some hours, which of course is not necessarily going to reshape everything about her life from some trauma in her childhood, but it's a taste of what it is. And in attachment theory, we might say that this is an experience of earning secure attachment, that you're getting a taste of what it can be to have people with you through vulnerability and supporting you and loving you and caring for you and drawing you into your strength within all of that. So that's a beautiful story of
and actually the more emotion we have in one of those experiences. So in that example, this woman was feeling really held instead of feeling abandoned or rejected, which may have been her old neurological pattern. In that tub with that eye contact and that strong holding and the water holding her, because of the high intensity of birth, she'll instantly get more bang for her buck. There'll be more neurons and more synapses firing all at once. So it can really be a very potent healing in that one instance. So it doesn't necessarily take 20 years of therapy. And that's what I keep saying to my clients is the more we can be in the body, and the common elements here, whether you're birthing a real baby and going through the labor, or whether you're rebirthing yourself and rearranging your physiology to overcome chronic illness or chronic symptoms, the common elements are trusting your body and learning how to return home to the body and trust the messages it's telling. Because actually when we do have failure to progress in a hospital, for example, if I'm freaking out under the bright lights, that's perfectly normal. That's my body serving me well. It's saying, no, these bright lights aren't safe. I'm going to stop, right? So it's about reframing how the body is working with us and listening to the body instead of self-shaming. And I think that common element is really important. Now, unfortunately for listeners, there is no C-section or cesarean to rebirth yourself. So I feel like as pregnancy and birth of our children is an opportunity to learn and grow and change and dive deep into fears. And I had a doula, and she kept asking me all the way through the pregnancy, this kind of thing arises. How do you think you'd want to meet it? What tools would we use? What do you feel comfortable with? What language? And she was always teasing out, the scenarios of if we freak out or blah, blah, blah. And we didn't need them, but we had all of those tools ready if it came up. And actually we had a very slow pre-labor, which I didn't know what that was at the time. I had to learn while I was in it. But it was just very gently my body thinking about opening and not opening. So it was something, nothing. And then I had a very quick birthing process. But interestingly, I transitioned, I think, from the pre-labor of thinking about opening to actually opening after a huge cry. And the cry was like, I just can't believe I'm going to be a mum. I never thought I'd be a mum. And I just had to kind of move through this deep emotion of going, oh my goodness, I'm going to become a mum. And birthing the mother, I think, was really what let my body open.
Yes, exactly.
And so I totally hear where you're coming from in terms of we just have to stay with the body, bring our loving kindness to whatever it is we're feeling. So having supports to move through shame or guilt or rejecting ourselves, abandoning ourselves. And as we're rebirthing ourselves through healing, vertigo, tinnitus, dizziness, these things, the body now is like, okay, there's no C-section. You can't avoid this. You literally have to go through it. You have to feel through it. This is a rite of passage, and I'm going to keep bugging you for the next few decades unless you stop and listen to me. And that is my lived experience as a clinician, seeing hundreds and thousands of these people. And I've seen clients with 20 or 30 years of symptoms who have dropped into this vulnerable place and rebirth themselves, and they come out the other side normal. So it's not that time is not an issue. As far as I'm aware, we can always neurologically change and adapt. Yes. Doesn't matter how young or old we are. And I think there has to be a readiness to trust the body. And that's where both of your books talk in detail about having an inner circle. You don't need to do this alone. We have to birth the baby alone, and we have to birth ourselves alone, really. But we can be supported and held in our vulnerabilities. And I think creating that network of support helps us to be ready to open.
Yes. So, and if I can speak a little bit more to that,
yes.
You know, I before I got involved in birth, which was really through the birth of my own baby and that radicalizing, got involved in birth work. But before that, I used to be a physical education teacher and an outdoor adventure sort of facilitator. Mm-hmm. So I had known a lot that many of us, our bodies can do wonderful things, but often our fear and our lack of trust in ourselves, which of course, if we think about what we're talking about psychologically, of course, that can go way, way back from a whole lot of other experiences, but that many of us don't achieve what we can achieve with our physical body because we can go into what I call these crises of confidence, where we're feeling there's nothing going wrong in our body, and it's just that we feel like we can't do it. It's too much, it's too strong, it's too hard. You know, whether it's about that abseiling down that cliff, or it's about, you know, running that marathon, or it's about birthing that baby. And you'll talk about this in terms of your followers in a moment, but that, and certainly in birth, there are some key points in a labor where a labor is an escalating physical experience. You know, the contractions are getting stronger, the oxytocin is flowing harder, the contractions longer, stronger, closer together, so more and more intense. This is the powerful way that our bodies open to birth our babies. And because I often use the analogy, you know, that for if you think about a fun run, it would be a fun run that starts at the base of the highest hill anywhere that you might run a fun run, starts at the base and it ends up at the summit, you know. So it's something that's escalating as you're going through. And at each point of where there's an escalation in the hormones coming through more strongly, oxytocin particularly, and then that drives these stronger, closer together, deeper contractions, women can sort of get a bit disorganized. They've been on a groove before this point, and now it's like, oh, I don't know now. And then they're in that sort of, that can blow out into a whole crisis of confidence about feeling, no, I don't want to, I can't, I shouldn't, I have to.
Help me, do it for me, no.
Yeah. And I'm sure that maybe that's always been part of a story for us as women across our evolutionary history, to reach some of those points of lack of trust or feeling like it's too much and too strong. But particularly for contemporary women, particularly in the eras of now of the epidural, which says, you know, it can all be taken care of, that you can be pain-free and, you know, not have to be in this struggle, then for women who want to have a go at normal physiological childbirth, there's an added impediment in terms of these crises of confidence, because we know just outside the door there is an epidural which can take it all away, and you can just continue playing Angry Birds on your phone or something. So that seduction of being saved from the effort and the energy of it and the intensity of it means that across what a lot of people think is transition, that's the point where you get a little bit, which is, you know, 8 to 10 centimeters late in first stage, that's the point where you're starting to feel like, oh, I can't do it. Well, what I've seen through my 42 years of birth work is that those points where women feel like it's too much for them, they can't do it, it's too strong, happen much earlier in the labor. So I started to talk about this idea of crisis of confidence, and that crisis of confidence is fueled socially, culturally, medically, as well as within the woman herself. And that at these crucial points, whether the mother is going to go on to surrender more deeply into the labor, and the labor keep unfolding with its power and potency and escalating intensity, is dependent on, at that point when the mother feels like she wants to give up and that she can't do it anymore and she shouldn't have to do it anymore and what have you, will depend on who is with her at that time. Yeah. And if she has people who are experienced in witnessing this, who are not freaking out about it, and so that can be a big challenge for partners of the women or sisters or somebody who's never been at a birth before, who can get caught in a sympathy loop. Yeah. And want the mother to be saved because it's very uncomfortable watching her in that distress, and anyway they don't know whether this is safe or not safe. But if the mother is supported at that time by that holding circle, that sort of what I call that intimate holding circle of people who are experienced in this, who know that everything is going brilliantly, these are predictable points. There are times when, maybe as a doula, I stop sitting in the corner and having my cup of tea and brownie and feel like I've just got to come in a bit closer and spend 4 or 5 contractions, really with some good eye contact and some conversation, some words, some maybe breathing with and so on. And then she goes over that hump, if you like, of that moving into this deeper engagement. And then, then maybe I'm sitting back in the corner having my brownie for the next 2 hours as things just, she's on a new groove and off she goes, and so beautiful. Then she might reach another crisis of confidence. But if women are following, and I'm not wanting to put this in the frame of COVID, eventually we will move out of this time, but just more generally, if a woman is relying on her male partner, the father of her baby, as her key support person, well, we see this unraveling because they're discomforted. They don't know this is normal. They're in a whole concern about, is it safe? Equating the pain with a lack of safety and the distress with a lack of safety, because we stick it in a hospital where if there's pain and distress, then it's coming out of things going wrong in the body. Whereas in our case, this is much more about things going absolutely right in the body. It's just that it's escalating. So women relying just on their partners, and in particular, most hospitals are really pain relief. This is midwifery theorizing. Either it's premised around pain relief, which is much more about nursing and medical things going wrong in the body, where of course pain relief is perfect for helping our healing when the body is needing to heal. But the other theory paradigm is about working with pain, and I usually put in the words working with functional physiological pain. So this is your marathon runners or your bushwalkers and hikers, or your birthing women, or your whoever, your yoga practitioners, people who are working to extend themselves in their body into their strength and their power and their potency, and knowing that when we're working strongly and hard with our bodies, there is that functional physiological pain of the stretch receptors and of the trying to get enough oxygen in and all of that, and that normalizing that and having people around the woman who can support her through those times when she's got to engage more deeply and strongly in that process is so important about whether she will or she won't, or that birth will go down that other pathway. Yeah. So you can speak to this, but I would imagine that I know on other healing journeys that there are these ideas of these crises of confidence where it's too much, it's asking too much of me, and I feel like I'm not strong enough to deal with it and what have you. And if you've got only people around you, this happens in breastfeeding as well, but if you only got people around you who feel like you shouldn't have to go through tough stuff and it should, can be taken care of by this, or you could just give up that idea of doing it anyway and just let somebody else take care of it, rather than having a support people around who not only have some expertise, but know how to boost your courage and capacity for the work, that I'm sure on healing journeys, these are crucial elements as well. It's not only about the person themselves and their own drive, but who they have around them. Yeah.
So I think crisis of confidence for my vertigo, dizziness, tinnitus clients is, well, straight up at the onset's usually quite a shock, can be quite traumatic. Then they'll go down the medical route of medical clearance, which is great and necessary. Then they may try some physiotherapy or some medication. And look, if that works, it works, great, you're done. But for clients who have the chronic conditions, they can end up seeing 15 doctors, osteopaths, spiritual healers, naturopaths, everything and anything, and they can try devices and ongoing medications. And really, this is the system saying, well, you can't sort it out yourself, so here's another device, here's another pill, here's another external paradigm or protocol I'm going to give you. And what that really doing is the message that the client's subliminally getting is, well, I'm failing, I'm abnormal, my body's wrong, I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
So then enter neuroplasticity, and the process clients are going through when they engage in my work is actually, my body is perfectly fine. The signals I'm receiving are coming from a confused body, a body that's getting mixed messages, and a belief system that's actually shaming myself and rejecting myself, and thereby further firing the very things I don't want to feel. So how can I take back the locus of control? How can I surround myself by a group of people who say, you've got this and what you feel right now is fine? What support do you need? How can you reassure yourself? How can we redirect that loving kindness and compassion back in towards myself to get my brain to fire the natural oxytocin, the natural feel-good love pathway hormones, where neurologically I can open up and grow into a new person instead of getting stuck in the old story of shame and guilt and I'm wrong, I'm abnormal, I need fixing. Why can't someone fix me, right? Yes. And I think that's the beauty of having that birthing experience, or for men, a marathon experience, or even perhaps being beside the fatherhood experience of being beside your partner as your child is born, is I think it really deeply instills in an intensity this, I can do this, I got through this, I am powerful. That relationship has an opportunity to deepen. And medical interventions are a gift. I would hate to think that I was giving pregnant in some remote mountain and the support I needed wasn't there. It's not about medicine intervention being a bad thing, not at all. It's just that if you're a healthy person going through healthy functional pain and transformation, and you're supported to go through that, the neurological benefits are healing, and it's a rite of passage to grow into that next person you're becoming. If that's interfered with, it means the emotional spiritual journey is being neglected. And yes, you're getting a healthy baby, and yes, you're getting cesarean or pain relief, but you're not, that opportunity is being missed. And then I think that's when it can really come and revisit us through later stages in life, welcome menopause or midlife crises, where the same stories are going to come back and manifest somehow. And
trying for
So this is where I've just found the process of birthing and dropping right into that vulnerable space has been just so fascinating for me, especially as I'm often the one beside watching and holding. And I found the parallels, and continue to find the parallels, really incredible. One recent one was my baby's pretty easy, really, I think, from what I've heard of other people's experiences. But just the other night, he was screeching and screaming for what seemed like on and off for 5 hours, and would try everything, and you get little moments of calm and show him the stars or give him a light show, even feeding wasn't really helping. And I couldn't help but realize this is what happens with my dizziness, vertigo, and tinnitus client symptoms. Sometimes out of nowhere, your body is just screeching at you, screaming at you. And what do? Do I go into this place of saying in that moment, well, I'm a bad mother, clearly I can't soothe my child, I'm a bad person. Do I go down that line, or do I be with my child? Do I hold my baby? Do I, even though it's screaming, do I pull it in close? And of course, eventually, holding him in close to my heartbeat, I think, was what he needed. And the rest is history. But it made me feel like this is what we need to do with ourselves when our body is screaming and screeching and discombobulated. How can we bring ourselves back in and hold ourselves as though we are a little baby without falling into the shame story and the guilt story? And so I just think on so many levels, this is a really beautiful visual for those of you out there with chronic illness, chronic symptoms, and you're just confused about neuroplasticity and why bother. I think having this analogy of a labor process of birthing and being with a very vulnerable baby, this is the process we're learning to do for ourselves and with ourselves.
It's beautiful, beautiful opportunity to present it in that way for people to see. Yes, I think that if I can just say one other thing about that relates to this issue about who's around you, that when you're in a struggling situation, whether it's about a healing journey or a birth or parenting teenagers or whatever, in terms of attachment, there's two aspects to it. One of them is, of course, that we've talked about, that thing about whether you've been held, the holding, the closeness, the attuned attention, so that your the foundation of you is building on I'm loved, therefore I'm lovable, I'm valued, therefore I'm valuable, I'm in somebody's heart and feelings and people are watching over me, they're attuned to me, so therefore I'm deserving of all of this care. And sometimes life is a bit tougher than I think, and I can also tune to these people and they will be there. I'll get that sort of support. So that's one part of it, and that part is called the safe haven. Yeah. So when we're in a threat situation, and hopefully we've got that foundation in our early lives, so that whenever we're in a threat situation where we feel like our own resources, we'll draw on our own resources because we know we have plenty of them. But if it's outside the range of our own resources, we'll draw in other resources. So that's one side. Then there is the next side, which is particularly as the baby is growing, and of course you're in those beautiful stages with that little baby of yours as they're starting to move and have more control over their own bodies and want to explore their worlds. And of course part of the whole of a growthful life is about exploring our world, exploring ourselves in our world, and developing more and more resources and skills and what have you. So this is about the aspect which is about secure base for exploration. And your baby is going to be, you say 5 or 6 months, yeah? So maybe starting to move a little bit, roll and so on, and to be looking at experiences of life outside of just the interaction between you and the baby and you, or his father, or his, I'm not sure, girl, boy, but that they're starting to explore the world around them. That may be about with the blocks, or it might be rolling over there, and of course that gets more and more. Eventually they're off to school, kinder school, and having to explore a whole lot of things. And so what are the messages that small child in those first few years, where this is laid down as foundational sense of self and sense of how the world works, what's being laid down laid down messages that, yeah, it's exciting exploring the world and you can do it. But if if it starts to get a bit strong there, then I'm here for you, but I'm not here for, it's this balance then about, am I here for you in a way that wants you to save you from any distress or any challenge or any feeling of that you're on a learning curve, rather than being fully able to execute that bike ride right from the get-go. So this is about how we're
rescuing that dynamic.
Exactly.
Speaking of which, I'm going to go grab the baby. I'll pause this and come back.
Okay.
All right, we're back.
Okay. So that aspect about how when the baby is exploring its world, and then through life, a foundation for how they might expand and explore their world. Around attachment theory, either they're feeling like they can be supported to keep going into the tough gig, whatever that tough gig is, whether it's birthing their baby, or it's a healing journey, or it's riding a bike, or it's whatever else, they can have that secure base that they can return to, that tells them it's okay, it is tough, you can do it, here are some steps, here's some guidance and what have you, and on they go out to explore their world again. The analogy that's often used is that toddler who starts to go over to move away from mum or dad a little bit and go over and explore those blocks or something over there, or when they first start to crawl and they're always looking back to see, somebody's still watching over me, is somebody still attuned to me, is it safe for me to go and explore this at the same time, do I still have that connection? So that connection then, but as we're adults, and particularly in the birth world, let me say for myself around that, how this works in my domain, that so when women are going through that crisis of confidence where they feel like they can't do it, they don't want to do it, it's too strong, is the support team providing that secure base for exploration, And the exploration in that scenario is the exploration of the deeper engagement with my body, the deeper trust of my body, the deeper engagement with my breath and my, working in that way. Is the support that I have around me encouraging me into that through guidance and, the big smiles that say, oh yeah, it looks pretty hairy, but it's brilliant, coming off that big contraction and the mother's complaining and what have you. Oh, what a fantastic contraction, it's doing this and this and this and this. So is that the sort of support we have around us, that secure base for exploration and achievement? Or is the support base either not there at all, which of course makes life very shaky to take on any new challenge, which is why I shut everything down and keep it somehow or other as controlled as we can, or is the support, yes, as you were saying, wanting to save us from any of that, oh, don't go over there to those, oh, don't try this, or oh, I'm not on the bike, or not this, or of course has the support been, as we're on a learning curve, learning new things like building a house of blocks or getting on that bike or what have you, and we're reprimanded because we knocked it over, or we're silly, or we're not this, not that, not the other. So there's a whole lot of factors that all of these things are being laid down, as you say, in that first 7 years, when we're thinking about these much deeper sort of layers of our psychological understanding of ourselves. I talk particularly about the first 3 years. Then these lay that foundation. And I guess there's another sort of psychological theory that talks about, do you have a growth mindset? Yeah. Or in fact, is your mindset limited? Is it's about positive psychology. So many of those other psychology. How have you been supported early on to embrace challenge and what that looks like at an age-appropriate way? And so then, that safe haven on the one hand, about feeling you're attended to and people hold you in mind and hold you in their care and feelings, and also what's required for achievement in life of all and many types is then having that secure base of people that you can lean into as needed when it's a bit tough, but they're also going to be encouraging you on into whatever that challenge is that you're taking on at that time. So they're important things, I think, for a healing journey too.
Definitely. And like I have heard some of my friends say they just didn't know where their midwives were. They felt really alone. There was a huge unknown element. How long will this take? When will they check on me? And and I think they didn't really know what they would. They didn't know that would be the environment. That just happened to be the environment they were in. It happened upon them. They didn't choose it. Yes. Whereas I completely chose my birth team for those reasons, and that's the benefit of having friends who birth before you, is you get the richness of their stories. Yes. And my memory of the birth team is just looking up, and I was in my own world. I was away with the fairies, just in the process in my body. But I have memories of looking up and just all these smiles. Everyone was just big teethy smiles and saying things like, "You're doing so well," and then I'd just go straight back in. Yes. So I think it makes a huge difference. I think we're really underplaying the importance of the human care, the humanism. Yes. Of course, having the Dopplers there and hearing the heartbeats is great too, but really emphasizing who is supporting you on this journey. It's not just about getting a hearing test or just getting a balance test. Who's holding you? Who's witnessing you? Who's giving you the big toothy smile saying you're getting closer to birthing yourself? This is exciting that you're stuck. We want you to be stuck right now.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I think celebrating every step of the way is so important.
Yeah. And I think if I can just say one other thing about the birth the sort of system or the culture in the hospital, back to your point about the midwife, my sense of it is that because, and I think that this is probably a laid down generational sense way back from our earlier life story as human beings, that women have always been supported at birth by other experienced women. So I think that that's sort of laid down as an embedded sort of psychological expectation to be with people who are tuned to us, who are with us. And so I think exactly as you said, that a lot of your friends are thinking when they go into the hospital that the midwives will be there for them, will be with them, because this is like a deep generational story, only to find quite surprised that no, the midwife is not there for them, is coming in and out. they don't know the midwife anyway, and they change shifts, so it's a different, they might make a good connection with this midwife, but then 8 hours later or 2 or 3 hours later that's changed and there's somebody else again. So standard care in our birth culture is that stranger midwife. Yeah,
And it's a very difficult place for the midwife to hold, because the poor old midwife is following protocols and rules and monitoring different dynamics of different people. So this midwife's stretched, that's difficult.
Exactly. Yes. So the research says that for women who are choosing or happen to have the luck to fall into the continuity of care midwifery programs, and in Australia that's only 8% of women who get to access continuity of care, as you did with your known midwife, or in the hospitals women are getting to know this team of midwives or a few particular midwives who are with them across the whole of the labour, then of course, and know them through the pregnancy, then as you say in your story, all of this stuff is worked out, talked about and what have you, and then there's that presence all the way through that labour. Whereas for women having that expectation and then feeling abandoned in a way that standard structure is abandoning women, and if women then have their own story of a vulnerability to abandonment, so this makes for a very shaky hormonal situation, and the births don't generally go well. So, there's political work to be done in terms of birth work, I'm sure, really in terms of holistic ways of understanding other distresses in the body. There's probably political action too in terms of how that sort of work might be more understood or supported, rather than just the very medical ways that then, if they can't find the remedy, then of course they sort of say, oh well, nothing more can be done, you're on your own now. There's probably political work to be done in terms of shifting and shaping that a little bit as well. So yeah, just riffing a little bit on your story about your own situation, and thank goodness to have friends who can spark that that understanding for you.
I've been so blessed, and so blessed that my friends were willing to share their birth stories. That's a gift too. As is all of the people who volunteered to share their healing stories on my YouTube channel with vertigo and tinnitus. I am constantly told people love hearing the recovery stories and the challenges they face and how they move through it, and just normalizing all of those feelings. And a lot of people with vertigo, dizziness and tinnitus feel like, I'm a bad parent. I can't be available. I can't attune to my child because I'm not even in my body. So all interconnected. Coming back to wrapping up this conversation is, if you are listening to this and you haven't yet birthed, find Rhea's books. This is the most recent one, Beyond the Birth Plan, and the first one, Birthing with Confidence, Savvy Choices.
I have it here, if I can put it up. This one.
That's a wonderful book too. It's one of those books I've given away, and it's off into the ether on its journey. I will
love them.
Yes, I will send a link to Rhea Dempsey's website. On a practical note, find a doula. If you know you have to go through a medical birthing situation and you're listening to this and saying, what do I do? Find a doula, someone who can be with you, be with your partner, hold that emotional, spiritual space, even if it's in COVID-19 times and it's over the phone. At least you have someone coming in there with experience, with support, who's there for you and only you. They're not dropping in and out of shift work, and they'll take you through the birth preparation leading up to it. My doula said, most of the work happens before the birth. By the time you're in the birth, you're in it. Facing the fears and working through getting to know and trusting the body happens way before. And then for those of you who have vertigo, dizziness, tinnitus, chronic symptoms, and you're like, oh my God, I'm rebirthing myself, I'm in labor, start toying with this and ask yourself, well, what new choices could I make? How can I be more savvy? What resources do I need? How can I get this oxytocin moving in my body so I can open up more fully to the person I'm becoming? Come and visit my website, subscribe to my YouTube channel, like my iTunes podcast, wherever you found me. I've got lots of these conversations constantly unfolding. So my website is seekingbalance.com.au, and yours, Rhea, is, do you want to spell it out for people listening?
Yeah, so it's birthing, it's either www.rheadempsey.com.au or www.birthingwisdom.com.au. It's my website. Yeah.
Great. And I'm going to give links to both of those. If you are listening, Rhea is spelled R-H-E-A, Dempsey, DEMPSEY.com.au. Such a wealth of wisdom. I've been really excited to have this chat with you. I'm so grateful that you've shared your time with me. So thank you so much on behalf of everybody listening and our future listeners. Thank you.
So wonderful to be here, and so wonderful to just share these, it's wonderful to share with other people, to have a passion about anything actually, but if you're sharing a passion that has some parallels, it's just so enriching. So I've loved it. Thank you very much for being in touch and having this. And I hope everybody who's listening, that there's something in it for you wherever you are in your life and whatever you're facing, that you can draw around you the people and that help to bring out your strength and capacity for dealing with challenges and expansion in life. Yeah.
And I highly recommend Rhea's book Beyond the Birth Plan if you do want to flesh out this conversation a little bit and potentially look into healing your past births, or you're using the analogy of moving through rebirthing yourself. They're really, really wonderful, supportive, resourceful books. So giving that a big plug.
Okay.
It's a little bye now from me. Thanks again, Rhea. And we'll see you in the next interview. Bye for now.
Okay. Bye.